All right. So thank you everybody for joining the fifth in our summer webinar series. Today we are going to talk a little bit about storage management inside of Iconic and some of the benefits that are provided by Iconic's unique architecture. Uh, on the call today are myself and Tim Child. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Iconic. Tim is the Chief Experience Officer, so I'm in charge of the money and he's in charge of how everything looks and why it's so pretty. So with that said, let's dive into storage. So storage is a big thing in media and entertainment and in creative environments. We're the biggest users of storage by far in the world. And Iconic itself does a pretty strong job of being able to manage a large variety of storages. So what we've found as our customer base has grown is that a lot of customers start with just a single storage in a single location, whether that's cloud or on-prem doesn't really matter. And then over time, they start to add more and more storage to the system. And because Iconic is inherently storage agnostic, that allows you to grow your visibility into all of your different workflows and all of your different content wherever it lives anywhere in the world. So with the Iconic brain living centrally in the cloud, but the actual storage itself living in any of our supported storage providers across all the different platforms or in any on-prem storage, you run into the ability to start to build an organizational structure that is larger and more comprehensive than you were able to do before with simple files and folders, regardless of where that is. So with that said, I'm going to hand off to Tim here to talk a little bit about some of our storage types.
Yeah, so basically, Iconic can support a number of different types of cloud storage. Out of the box, Iconic is supplied with Google Cloud Storage backing it, but it can also be configured to use Amazon S3, Microsoft Azure, and Backblaze B2. And customers can actually use their own buckets. We call it bring your own bucket with this. We also have generic S3 support, and we validate these S3 storages. So examples of that are Object Matrix, Wasabi, and Cloudient. And basically, if you wanted to bring your own S3 storage, we would have to validate that to make sure that it properly implemented all this needed APIs and so forth. But that would be possible as well if needed. Saying that, we also support our on-premise storage. So over to Mike, talk about that.
Yeah, so Tim spoke purely about kind of cloud storage or object storages, but obviously we also have file system support, and we do that through what we call the Iconic Storage Gateway. So the Iconic Storage Gateway is a simple little application that runs on Mac, Windows, or Linux. And what it does is any file system that can be mounted by a Mac, Windows, or Linux system can then be indexed by Iconic. And what we mean by that is we can keep track of what's going on in that file system, keep an eye on all the storage movement, know what files are where, when they're moved, those sorts of things. And also the ISG is responsible for handling local proxy transcodes. So in a lot of cases, it's much more efficient if you have a large SAN or NAS or something along those lines to have all of your proxies generated on premise rather than upload your high res to the cloud simply to get proxies generated. So in these environments, the ISG itself generates the proxy and then delivers that proxy to the cloud into our Iconic proxy storage. We do also have several manufacturers that are supporting running the ISG directly on the storage itself. So in these cases, you don't need a dedicated computer for it, because if you already have storage that supports ISG running on it, the ISG can actually run directly on box. And from that perspective, there's no extra infrastructure needed whatsoever to handle this. So your Iconic infrastructure is literally nothing if you have one of the supported storages. So talking about kind of the different types of storage that we support, I think it is a bit unique. A lot of people will say, hey, we support cloud and file system, but we support both as native online storage and a variety of other different storage purposes. And with that, I'll hand over to Tim to kind of talk about the different purposes of storage inside Iconic.
Yeah, so for any given storage type, you can define a purpose. And we support 5 different purposes out of the box. The ones we're showing here are file, export, and archive. File is kind of the everyday managed storage, whether that's cloud object storage or whether it's on-premise storage. That's the kind of storage you'd be reading from, writing to. You can set up scanning of it and so forth. So typical use cases for this are sort of SAN or NAS accessible to an Iconic storage gateway, or the Iconic storage gateway running on the partner's NAS. It could be existing cloud buckets where you have content already that you want to bring into Iconic and then continue using with Iconic, or you could set up new cloud buckets for file storage for reading and writing. You could also set up a cloud bucket for remote cloud editing. So if you've got editing machines in the cloud, we could write to that storage, read from it, and as well as those remote editing. Export storages, they are unmanaged by us. Basically, they're set up so we can write to them. And typical use cases would be to write to a third-party system, to send to transcode perhaps, or to send to a bucket which would trigger a cloud function. And that cloud function could then do an analysis, quality assurance, and so forth. And perhaps the result of that goes back into Iconic. Or indeed, you could set up your customers as an endpoint. So you could export your files to a customer as needed. And lastly, the archive type. This is typically storage where we can't immediately read from it. So, for example, Glacier-backed storage from Amazon, the read times could be up to 48 hours. And so we assume that we can't immediately get access to the files on there. So we would use that for archiving to that, perhaps for long-term, for sending triggering workflows based upon archive, and also removing from the actual production file storage itself. So back to Mike.
Yeah, so without too much more, we're not big on long slide decks here, so we won't bore you too long with this, and we'll dive into actually showing some of this stuff off in action. So here we have our Iconic system, and the first thing I'm going to do is show kind of how we can work to add new content to the system that is maybe production level content. So I've got a Backblaze storage bucket open over here, and you can see it's got a couple of files in it, and I have Iconic watching that bucket right now. And as an Iconic admin, I can simply go into storages, find that storage, and click our scan button. And what that's going to do is tell Iconic to go look at that cloud bucket and find all the new files that have shown up inside that bucket. And you'll notice what's happening now is that there's a scan happening. It's picking up all of the files in that bucket. And because there were a couple of new files that were in there, it's going to pick those up and actually add those as new items into Iconic as well. So you'll notice that it started a transcode job for Lighthouse here. And in a few seconds, we'll have another item. So looking back into Iconic, we can see Lighthouse and Costumes both came in from my Backblaze bucket by simply scanning it. And this was a full high-res ingest from cloud. We can see that our original lived in the Backblaze storage. We can see our proxy lives in Iconic in this case. So this is a use case where maybe you've been using Amazon S3 or Backblaze or GCS as your primary storage, but you don't have a good indexing layer that sits on top of that. You can connect Iconic directly to the cloud storage, scan in any data that is coming into the system via either the API or by simply just running a scan on it, and then that becomes available to be manipulated at a later time. Now, the other thing you can do is use Iconic to upload directly into cloud storages. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a file, and we will say, hey, let's grab this MPEG-4 file here on my desktop, hit choose, and then I'm going to send that into my S3 bucket. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the upload button here. And I have my Iconik set up to prompt me for metadata upon upload. So it's required for me to add certain fields of metadata. So this is something you get as an added bonus if you're using the Iconik uploader. And I can simply say, all right, I want to tag it with some metadata here. We'll say category webinar and language English. Sure. Hit done and hit upload. And now Iconik is actually brokering a direct connection to my Amazon S3 storage. I am sending via our web app directly into my storage bucket. And once that upload is complete, that file will actually be proxied by our cloud transcode stack. And we can go ahead here and watch and see that, hey, there's the high res, and a proxy is going to be generated now in the cloud for our new uploaded item. Now, something new we also added in the latest release, which actually just dropped yesterday, so those of you that haven't seen that yet, go ahead and check it out, is the ability to actually upload entire folder schemas into Iconik. So what I can do is go to any collection inside of Iconik, and I can simply go to my desktop here, and I'm going to grab this folder that says folder upload, and I'm going to just put a few clips into a few different folders here. And I'm just going to simply drag it right onto that collection. And it's going to say, hey, here's your different items. Which cloud storage do you want to upload it to? This time I'm going to put it into Google Cloud Storage, and I'm going to keep the directory structure. And I'm going to go ahead and put in some metadata on all these because I have to. Hit done and hit upload. And what this is going to do is build my entire folder tree that I had in my file system right within Iconik, and also upload all of that data into those subfolders. So you can see we've got some PDFs and things along those lines that showed up here. And it's also going to maintain that directory structure for the files themselves. So if I go ahead and take a look, I can now see that inside my Iconik files GCS bucket, that went into demo collection folder upload folder 1. So that's where the high resolution media is for that particular item that we just uploaded. So being able to upload folders is also pretty powerful now directly within Iconik, right within our user interface. Now, the last thing we can do is use the ISG to bring in content, which is our Iconik storage gateway. So on my system here, if I go back to my Finder, I have a folder here called Iconik ISG. This is what I'm telling my storage gateway, which is running on my system right now on my Mac, to watch. And I've got a folder here called webinar content and storage management. And I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this demo ingest. And inside of that, I'm going to just go ahead and let's find a AIFF file. So here's an audio file that I'm going to add to that folder. And what I've done is by simply just moving the file in the file system over to a place that Iconik is watching, that's going to automatically get a low-res proxy generated by my laptop. That low-res proxy will get checked into cloud storage automatically, but the high-res lives where it was originally. So if I kind of go back into Iconik here and take a look underneath my storage gateways, you can see Mike's laptop's an option there. And if I browse down, you'll notice there's a webinar content folder. You'll notice there's that storage management folder, and there's that demo ingest folder I just created on my file system. So I didn't do anything in Iconik to make that show up. And I click demo ingest, and there's my low-res proxy for that audio file that we've put together. And I can see all the different places that this particular item lives on my storage. So with that, now that we've got some content brought into the system and we have a lot of stuff in a bunch of different places, I'm going to hand it over to Tim, who on the other side of the country, or the other side of the globe right now, is going to show off some of our transfer capabilities inside of Iconik.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll just share my desktop. So I've got the same view of Iconik that Mike was just showing. And from here, I basically can access any of these files that he was working with. But more than that, I can also do transfers to make sure that they're available. from cloud to Iconic storage gateways and so forth. So, for example, this file here is on the Backblaze B2 storage. So I want to transfer that, and I want to make sure that that is on Mike's ISG. So I can choose a transfer, and I can go down and I can find Mike's laptop. And I can basically just send it to anywhere on there, but I want to send it into this particular path. So I'm going to transfer that like so. We can get status views of what's going on in the system, including transfers, by looking at the jobs. So I'm going to go into the jobs, have a look, and we can see that it's awaiting transfer and finished. So if I go back and have a look at that asset, and I'll just jump down here, we can now see that it's on B2 storage, and also it's on Mike's laptop underneath that path that I put in. So if we look for material that is on Mike's machine, which we can do from here, I've got access to all the storage gateways, I've got Mike's laptop, and I already have everything open to webinar content, and I can look into, say, Kali Drive. I can find some picture that I want to upload into the cloud. So I can also do a transfer, select a destination. This time I'm going to choose a Google Cloud Storage and put it in the roots and do a transfer. And then that's going to read from his ISG running in his laptop and send it up to that cloud bucket. So if we go over to the jobs, that's waiting. Just take a short time and then it will get transferred. Now, a lot of these jobs can be queued in the system. So if there's a lot happening on the system, like this one at the moment is probably being queued in the background while other things are happening, then it will go into the queue and be processed as needed. So while we're waiting for that, I'm going to show transferring from cloud storage to cloud storage. So we've already seen that this lighthouse was in B2 storage. And what I want to do is also make that available in the Google Cloud. So I'm going to go into the search interface where I was doing this before, and got Lighthouse here, transfer, choose a cloud bucket. This time I'm going to put it on S3 and just transfer that as well. Go back to admin, go into the jobs, and we can see that the transfer that was happening to Iconik Files GCS has finished. The transfer to the S3 storage has finished, and the transfer to Mike's laptop has finished. So they're all done. Finally, what I want to do is also show that it's possible to do Iconic Storage Gateway to Iconic Storage Gateway transfers. So I'm going to go down to some of this material that's on Mike's Iconic Storage Gateway, and I want to transfer it to another Iconic Storage Gateway. So I'll pick one at random, do a transfer, choose a destination, and this time I'm going to choose Detroit Office ISG. And I'm just going to stick it into the root of that. So these Iconic Storage Gateways, they're not actually on the same network. And in this case, what's going to happen is the Iconic Storage Gateway is going to send it up into the cloud, temporarily store it there, and then push it to that other Iconic Storage Gateway storage. Once that has completed and we've made sure that the file is properly transferred, then we'll remove it from that temporary storage. So I'm going to go to admin, to jobs, and we can see that that's transferred, and that's all done.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is to point out here is that Tim is sitting in Stockholm, I'm sitting in Detroit, and Tim just scheduled the transfer of data on my laptop to go to my office across town in Detroit, which I am not sitting in currently. And now that most recent file is still sitting on a SAN across town, and somebody not even in that town was the one that scheduled it simply through the Iconik Web UI. So a lot of power in the ability to distribute content throughout the system. And now what I'm going to do is actually take over the screen share here and show you a couple of other fun things that can happen with the storage gateways and storage management. So Tim just sent some of those files over to me, and if we hop back here, we'll notice that some of here's all the files that he was sending to me. Here's the Lighthouse file he transferred down to my storage gateway. Well, I have another storage gateway running currently on my premise. So I've got a NAS in-house here. It's just a Linux NAS that is running, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy into that location. I've got a ISG running here, and here's a webinar folder. And I'm just going to put this file, this untitled 01853 file, in here, and I'm going to rename it to a Ferrari picture. So what I've just done is copied a file from my Finder to a NAS using my Finder. This file lives on a Mac running Catalina. This file now lives on a Linux box running CentOS in a completely different piece of storage with a completely different name and a completely different file structure or folder structure than it had originally. And what's interesting here is if I go and search for that, so if I go 01853, because that's the image I just transferred, and we take a look at that, you'll notice that Iconik just picked it up and figured out that it was in the same place or in this other location. So not only can you use Iconik to transfer things around from any type of storage to any type of storage, you can also use any tool you want to transfer things around behind Iconik's back. And as long as that storage supports checksuming, so all file systems and ISGs do, and some cloud storages do as well, we know it's the exact same file. So if you have direct point-to-point connectivity between two different locations, or if you have, let's say, a accelerated transfer protocol or something along those lines, you could then use that to send things between ISGs and not even have to use us. And you don't have to do any more work. There's no API calls that need to be made or check-in process or anything like that. It is just deliver a file that we already are aware of to another folder somewhere else in the world that we are watching, and we'll just pick it up and go. So with that, I think the next thing we kind of want to show off is the ability to handle archiving. So in this case, I'm going to use this exact picture as an example again. I can go and say, hey, I want to archive this. And as Tim was talking about earlier, we have a variety of different archive types here, and I've got both a Backblaze archive and a Glacier archive. For this image, I'm just going to say, hey, send it to the B2 archive, keep it online. So all I'm doing now is not only do I have it available on two storage gateways in two different physical locations, I'm also going to have it archived to cloud storage. And by archived, it means that, hey, that isn't going to be necessarily immediately available to me unless it also exists on another piece of storage. So archival, like Tim said earlier when we were talking about this, means, hey, we want to keep this someplace, but we can't guarantee that's necessarily online. So it's just a second tier of storage that's more cost effective, and so we can keep track of things. Now, what I can also do is hop back up and we could do a bulk archive. So let's maybe grab these 5 files right from our search index, and I say archive here. And in this case, I'm going to send them into Glacier. And I'm going to say delete after archiving in this case. And what this will do is for all of those assets, send those particular items into an archive tiered S3 or a deep Glacier tiered S3 bucket. And then when that process is complete, it'll actually remove those files from online storage. So my option will be to restore those files. And this takes a little while to do because we're working, but here you can see this one's actually already completed. So this has sent that file into Glacier. That file status is archived. And now that it's archived, I could actually restore it to any other storage I wanted to on the system. So I can go, I'm going to go ahead and trigger a restore of this. And again, I'm going to put it onto my Detroit NAS and say restore. And this is going to actually, because this is tiered to Deep Glacier, what it's actually going to do is fire up a job inside of Iconik that shows us that we're going to be basically waiting, and we're not going to Oh, actually, it didn't tear off yet, so it's successfully restored already. But because of Glacier tiering policies, if something is offline, it will fire that job off for you automatically. And it looks like, let's scroll down here. We have one from earlier that I can show you as well. So Glacier. So we have a job that has already been tiered off that we started quite a bit earlier this morning, and you can see it's still waiting for that restore to happen because that is in deep Glacier, and Amazon tells us, hey, that might not be available for 48 more hours, or well, now at this case, 43 more hours, but we have jobs that'll run to maintain that. Now, the last thing you might want to do when it comes to archival is say, okay, I've got a lot of data in a cloud bucket already. I don't necessarily need proxies for it, but I need a way to bring that all into Iconik so that I can start organizing it, tagging it with metadata. And when I need it back, I have a method to easily restore that to any of my storages that Iconik's watching. So in this case, I've actually got that Glacier bucket set up here, and I can do the exact same thing I did earlier with my online storage. I can say, scan that. But when we have it set up as an archive storage, we do it a little differently. With an online storage, we say, hey, we know that file's available. We're going to generate a low resolution proxy of that file immediately for you. With a archive scan, it just is going to go in and find all of those files, and we can go take a look at our jobs and see that it's scanned in 45 files. And just so that you guys can see this, here is the folder structure that I had with a handful of images and a handful of video files that were available inside Glacier. And if I hop back into Iconik now, you'll actually see there's a bunch of new items that showed up, but they don't have proxies. And that's because we didn't want to incur egress on these or restores on these just to generate proxies. But I have the entire storage methodology available. So if I go into my cloud storages and look at Glacier, I can now browse and see video and images. And if I go into any of those folders, I can see all of the items. Now you'll notice something else interesting here. I have a bunch of files here that do have proxies. And that is because Glacier and S3 also support global checksumming. And those were files that I added to Iconik a year ago. And I added them completely separate from Iconik to a Glacier bucket and then scanned in the Glacier bucket. And because we had the checksum available, it actually knew that it was already in on my headquarters ISG back in Stockholm and also in this Glacier images folder. So it linked the two together automatically for me. So lots of power around how you can handle archival from within Iconik. With that, I'm going to hand it back off to Tim, and he is going to show you how to do some exporting. You're on mute.
Thank you. And so basically what I want to show now is exporting. It was one of the storage purposes that we were talking about earlier. So if I have a look at the overview of all the storages on the system, we can see a list here, and we can see that this one has the purpose exports. We'll just go in, and basically we can set up those different purposes, as I was saying. And we can also set up an abstraction from the actual storage itself. So if I go down to export locations and we have a look at the one that's already configured, we can see that export GCS, the storage that I was just showing, has been set up as an export location, but it has further attributes that we've given to this location. This means that you can easily set up for your users different locations for them to export to, and make sure that it gets put into the correct path and it can have metadata and the format of that metadata. So let's go ahead and do an export. So I'm going to go into this picture here, and I would like to export that to that storage. So I basically choose the export location. I can choose whether to create a folder for the asset, and if there's already an asset of the same name, I could overwrite that, but I'm just going to hit export. So that is going to export it from one Google Cloud storage, this Iconik Files GCS, to this other bucket, and that is actually in different regions. So if I switch now and I've actually got an overview of the bucket here. We can just reload the page, and we should see the export in a few minutes. This interface doesn't always load quickly. While that's happening, let's make sure that the actual export job itself has completed. Yeah, so Iconik says it has, and it should turn up any second. And there we go. So it's created a folder for it. This is based upon the path at the moment. So if I have a look in here, I have my PNG file, which isn't so big. So if I go back to the root of the buckets, you can also see that there is a file which is actually the metadata file. So we can go and have a look at that. And that's just a JSON file with the metadata properties in there. So that would obviously be very useful for being picked up by external systems that would like to read the metadata, and you can put all sorts of values in there based upon our metadata schemas. So if I switch back to Iconik, there's one more export type I'd like to show, and that is basically exporting to an ISG. So I'm going to export this PDF. So I'm going to go into PDF, select exports. This time I'm going to choose my laptop's delivery bin, and I'm just going to hit export. So that's basically just going to send that file over to Mike's laptop in Detroit for him to read.
Yeah, and what's important to note about all this is that exports are a little different than just doing transfers, because exports are sending those files without the expectation of Iconik to continue managing it. So I have a directory on my laptop that is set up for exports associated with things, and that's not being managed by Iconik. So if I go ahead and share my screen now, again, so let's kick this over. And we go ahead and browse back into my folder here. Whoops, that's the wrong one. That's my NAS. This is my folder here. So you can see there's a folder called exports. And now you can see that PDF and the JSON file that was just exported by Tim are available. So there's my metadata file, and there's my PDF file that got exported back to my on-premise file system. So it works both ways. If you want to send stuff from cloud up to or down to premise, if you want to send stuff from premise to cloud, or if you want to go premise to premise or cloud to cloud across providers, doesn't really matter. Exports are a great way for you to be able to do kind of a delivery and kind of send it and forget it workflow for management of content. So with that said, I think what we will do is open up to a few questions, and we've got a few that have queued up while we've been doing all this. So let's see, first question is, do you support direct transfer between ISGs not through the cloud? So right now, today, we don't have that support natively, but you can use any tool you want to accomplish that very easily. So if you wanted to use an rsync or something along those lines, or Aspera, or you name it, you could do that. We are working on that feature actively, though, and it's slated for release in calendar 2020. So that'll be coming right around the corner. Next up from Bastion, with the lack of folder downloading currently due to browser limitations, is letting users set up gateways on their personal systems still at a work from home company an idea to enable them to transfer folders to their home system? Absolutely. It's not a problem. You can have as many ISGs as you want within a domain. The biggest thing there is the management dynamic, but for smaller teams, we actually see this quite frequently. If you've got 5 to 10 people, each person may have an ISG on their laptop, and also there may be 1 or 2 ISGs watching, on-premise large file systems back at the office when you're in work from home mode, and moving stuff back and forth can all be scheduled right through Iconik. So yeah, that definitely works without too much issue. Let's see. Anonymous asks, do you support file acceleration like Aspera or File Catalyst or similar? Not natively, but again, you can, if you already have one of those technologies and you want to transfer things to and from cloud buckets, to and from ISGs, you don't really need to inform us, as long as that storage supports checksumming, which is going to be literally every file system, no matter what. And then a majority of the cloud storage providers, you'll be able to transfer things back and forth, and Iconik will automatically know it's the same item. So you don't necessarily need a formal integration with us to continue to use those tools. Let's see. So Bastian asks, is there a way to use transfer, but instead of copying, use a move? So right now, not really. We're going to try to work on allowing you to do a move via transfer as well in the future, but we got to be careful with that because that's obviously potentially destructive. The second thing that we've got on the kind of roadmap is the ability to do storage specific deletes. So if you do a batch transfer to something, you'll then also be able to right click and say storage delete, not asset delete, but just look at all those assets. And if it lives on a specific storage, clean up the file from that storage in those cases. So hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be seeing those, maybe Q1 at latest. I don't know. Michael's not on the phone, so or on the call right now, so he's probably going to yell at me for saying that. But next question from Justin. How would you suggest one use this for remote video editing workflow? So there's a vast variety of ways that you can use Iconik for video or remote workflow. We actually did a full 90-minute webinar on this. So if you want to go check that out, if you hit iconik.io, hit our blog, go to the webinar series, and there's actually a video right at the bottom of this page that's all about the remote collaboration for video editing and kind of the processes around that. If that doesn't answer all your questions, hey, reach on out, and I'd love to do a one-on-one. You know, we can do some more direct questions for you. But that's a pretty strong starter. And you'll also notice on our webinar page, all the previous webinars we've done are posted. You can watch them here as well. So if there's any questions you have, this is a good place to start. And again, feel free to reach out to us. Let's see. Neil asks, is ISG transferred controlled by role or permission? Somewhat, yes. So inside of Iconik, everything has granular access controls. That also applies to storages. So if I go to any specific storage in the system, you can see there are access controls as to who can see those storages and what you can do with those storages. So if you don't have the ability to manipulate a storage, or if you don't have the ability to actually see a storage, then you're not going to be able to transfer to or from it based on the roles that you have applied and the access controls that are applied to those storages. So you're getting into a little bit more advanced territory there, but yes, you can absolutely kind of control who can see what. And you can do that with pretty much everything in Iconik. So users can be very granular controlled in what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed to see, where they're allowed to write to, that sort of thing. Okay, let's see. And last, we have Anonymous. Does the high resolution media have to go to the cloud? So the answer to that is no. If you're running on a storage gateway and that storage gateway is set to generate proxies locally, then that file lives only, oh, that's one we archived earlier. Scroll down a little bit further so we get one we didn't archive yet. So in this case, you can see the original high res of this particular image only lives on my laptop, and the low res lives in the cloud. So you have the ability to have 100% on-prem high res storage and still have the ability to globally share this information all over the world should you want to. And you'll also notice that there's a request original button in here. So if you give users the role that allows them to do this, if this is living on my laptop and Tim's halfway across the country or halfway across the world, he could click this button and my laptop will now start automatically sending that file into our default cloud, whatever you define as your default cloud storage for the system, and be available to everyone at that point, not just to me for the high res. So the data can live wherever it makes the most sense to live, and data can live in as many different places as you'd like it to live. Let's see. Anonymous asks, Can you please talk more about running an ISG on the ScaleLogic system? ScaleLogic has both app servers, and then some of their storage lines actually have on-box compute support. So you'd want to talk to the ScaleLogic guys to figure out which storage you have versus which ones offer this natively, because they've got a pretty large line of storage. But some of their systems offer it natively right on the box running the storage, but they also have direct app servers that have native clients for all of their storage as well, whether it's fiber or Ethernet. You can talk with them about what the best fit is in your environment for that. Okay, Vitaly asks, can you elaborate more about ISG integration with tools on air? Is this live ingest support or post ingest? So tools on air actually does have their own storage, which is called Just Store, and they support running the ISG directly on that storage. So in that case, you're basically talking about any folder that is being watched by the ISG and you're ingesting things or allowing you to do playout for would just naturally work. This is not necessarily edit well ingest, but because Tools on Air's ingest system does support pre and post scripting for ingest controller, we do have customers that have done exactly that, where they're registering the objects with the API before they're even done being written, and then making one more call to Iconik when it's done to say, hey, this file's actually closed, because our API supports that. And then you can have a true edit well ingest support with Tools on Air on their storage and their ingest controllers within Iconik. Anonymous asks, does the ISG work with Lucid Link? The answer is yes. So believe it or not, I actually have in this particular environment a Lucid Link volume in my storage gateways. You'll notice it here. And the data that lives inside there is also on a Lucid Link volume that happens to live on my desktop here. So you'll notice that all the same content, all the same things. And if I take a real quick picture of Tim here, and I will just throw that right into my test folder here inside Lucid Link, and we'll rename that to Tim. Whoops. And I actually have, believe it or not, my ISG for this Lucid Link volume running in the cloud. So I have the Lucid Link volume with the 10 gigs of cache or something like that running on an EC2 instance, and the proxy generation and all of that is actually going to happen in the cloud for a file I just added to my local Lucid Link volume. That file is going to get uploaded to the backend cache for Lucid Link. Proxy gets generated. And if we go take a look into my admin now, there's Tim. There's the picture I just added in from Lucid Link, and you can see the volumes of Lucid Link in the test folder. Proxy lives there. So yeah, it works pretty well. Let's see. Do we have any more questions? It does not look at it. So yeah, we got one more question from Vitaly here. Coming back to using the ISG for personal drives, any recommendations on removing ISGs later on? So the biggest gotcha there is obviously you're going to want to make sure that you've transferred that content before you remove the ISG, because if you simply remove the ISG without removing the assets or without transferring that data to another storage, what ends up happening is you have a bunch of assets that only have proxies at that point because you've removed the actual high resolution media from Iconik. You've told it it's not there anymore. You can get around this though by setting up those local ISGs to auto replicate as well. So you can see for my home office NAS, I actually have that set up to automatically replicate as an upload original files to remote cloud storage. And that means that I could just pull the plug on this ISG anytime I want, and it's not really going to hurt Iconik because all of that data still lives in the cloud as a replica. So that can work as well if you need to. Great. So that was quite a few questions. If anybody has any more, we'll hold on for a few more seconds and let that happen. And while that's going on, I think it's worth mentioning too that in the not too distant future here, we do have a few more webinars coming up. Our next one is going to be focused around specifically using the Iconik panel for Adobe tools and the various different ways that we can get in and out of not only Premiere, but also After Effects, Audition, Illustrator, that sort of, and Photoshop. We're also going to be doing a Shortcuts to the Cloud webinar. What we're actually doing is taking a pretty large data set and using Backblaze's Fireball solution to migrate that data via FedEx to the cloud and then link it all back up to on-premise storage. And then we have a few more in the works that we'll be announcing probably in the next week or two. So keep your eyes out for that, anybody that is interested in those. So it doesn't look like we got any more questions here. So I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining this webinar. Hopefully it was useful to you. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to hit us up. You've got Mike and I'm Mike, and Tim's contact info. You also have our support system. Happy to help where we can. And yeah, everyone have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.